So we can probably go ahead and start the meeting. Is that okay? All right, so on the agenda is three things, and the main one is looking at our bylaws and how they interact with the FOA um, uh, laws for Maine. And I had the opportunity to have a pretty long discussion with Brenda Keelty, who is the FOA ombudsman for Maine. Um, and I got a lot of information. So I'll share my screen with our bylaws and then share my screen with the pertinent parts of the FOA statute, and we can talk about that. After that, if we have time, and I think we will, we'll talk about developing some type of protocol or recommendations for how council members can respond when they're asked to talk to the press or asked to give comment on to the legislature. And I want to let you know that for all of these, I did not write up any specific changes or proposals because I wanted to hear from you all first. Also, writing up things that are kind of legal is certainly not my forte. Before we go on, any questions at all? Okay, all right. Grayson, can I share my screen?
Yeah, you should have access. It'll be
All right.
down in the middle.
Share. Okay. Let me get our bylaws up. And then, oops, Zoom, here we go. All right. And I share like the entire screen. Is that right? All right. Can you all see that?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, very good. So let me get to the parts that are pertinent for FOA. And I tried to highlight them, and my computer wouldn't allow me to highlight them last night. So let's see, and I want to get rid of this there. So the important parts I felt were 2.4 here, transparency. Council shall operate with all reasonable transparency and in a compliance with Maine's Freedom of Access Act. And that's just kind of I found that to be kind of basic and didn't really give specifics. And the specifics were more down here on, oh, let's see. Regular meeting. On here on 4.2, meetings of the council shall be held on such notice as complies with this section in Maine's FOA. So that's where our bylaws talk. Now, there's one place where we talked about the bylaws. And Grayson, can you help me? Where in the bylaws did it talk about um, meetings of? Here we go. This is it. Notice of meetings. 4.6, public notice shall be given of all meetings of three or more council members. So that's what we have in our bylaws. And talking with, and I know we had a discussion about this early when we first started the Recovery Council and started the bylaws. Talking to Brendan and then talking to Brenda Keelty, this may be in um, conflict with the FOA laws. So what I'd like to do now is show you the pertinent parts of the FOA statute. So this is the FOA statute, and in uh, 402 definitions, public proceedings means the transaction of any functions affecting any or all citizens of the state by any of the following. And we would come in under, let's see. Oh, this is a screenshot, so I can't show you. But one of them is any council that has that gives recommendations or is basically set up by the government of Maine. And let me show you the other pertinent part here. In 406, public notice shall be given for all public proceedings as defined in 402, which we just went over. If these proceedings are a meeting of a body or agency consisting of three or more persons. So the way this is meant to be in talking to Brenda Keelty is not if the meeting itself is of three or more persons, but if the meeting is of an agency that's of three or more persons. So so that is kind of in conflict with what our bylaws are. So let me get back to the Zoom thing here, if I can do that here. Grayson, how can I get back to the Zoom thing so that I can see you guys?
Yeah, there should be a little button possibly at
Stop
the top of your,
share.
yep, there you go. Perfect.
Okay, good. So I just wanted to hear, my feeling is that we should change where the bylaws say a meeting of three or more persons, and we should be more aim for more transparency so that for me, any time that two or more council members are meeting and discussing anything that would affect the people of Maine, that would be a public meeting. And we would have to have, it would have to be done with, what do you call it? Prior notice that this was a meeting and that the public would be able to have access to that meeting. So I'd like to hear other people's comments on that. Because it's going to definitely affect how we interact, and it's going to slow things down. Pat, go ahead.
Can you
Pat,
hear me?
Pat, I can't hear you if you're talking.
Okay.
We can hear you now. You were on mute before.
No, I'm having problems trying to negotiate this phone, make Zoom work, because for some reason my computer won't. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So my question is, I know that Brendan has always struggled with the three-person rule. And as much as I want to be transparent, I also realize that in the past, 2 years, we've run into difficulty almost being too public that it creates a slowdown in business.
Recording in progress.
For instance, I
Oop, oop. Now we have an echo. Do you guys have an echo?
I'm going to leave one of them. Just go ahead.
All right, Pat, are you able to talk now? While Pat's trying to get online again. Oh, Pat, can you hear us now?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my concern is quick, is the fact that, for instance, we had to be so public in the grant process that it was very uncomfortable for me. We were talking about awarding grants to people and really didn't have the opportunity amongst ourselves to say some of the things that we wanted to say, but we didn't want to say them in public. So that's my only concern, is that we have the opportunity to be able to occasionally, particularly with awarding grants, and about hiring and doing contracting work, that we have the ability not to always have the public there. The results of those meetings are fine. It was very awkward for me, particularly in the grant process, to figure out, have a real honest conversation being very public.
Um, Thank you, Pat. Uh, Grayson, the council can go into executive session when we discuss things that are sensitive. Would it be appropriate when we're discussing specific grants to go into executive session?
Um, I believe so. I don't want to speak too definitively on that because I haven't. I'm looking back over the executive session section in the bylaws now. Um, and it says any matter that would be discussed in executive session under FOA, which obviously we don't know for like without looking at FOA what that is. But then it also says, and this part is what I think would okay, yeah. Any matter which any person or entity other than the council has recognized a privacy concern, including but not limited to, and the very first one is discussions of grant proposals pending approval or rejection.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So Pat, that would help us with the privacy thing. It wouldn't help us with the slowing down. This would definitely slow us down. In talking to Brenda, she said it absolutely will slow you down. And the FOA is not meant to be efficient. It's meant to be transparent. And she said slowing it down would be a natural consequence of following the FOA statute. What I would like us to do, if we change the bylaws, is to um, get some expertise at one of our council meetings and a presentation on meeting efficiency. And I'm not an expert in meeting efficiency, but I think we've all been in meetings that are really efficient and meetings that aren't efficient. And the meetings, I can remember one committee I was on. It was the stroke committee at Central Maine Medical Center. That was the most efficient meeting I've ever seen. It started on time, didn't matter who was there, ended on time. Everyone got a chance to talk on each thing, but you could not repeat yourself. You never, so I'm going to repeat myself. You could never repeat yourself in on any issue. So everyone got to speak, say their word, and then we would vote on it. And it was really good. We got so much done. So I would like to have a presentation to our council on meeting efficiency if we do this.
Paul, I'm sorry, I was having a hard time to hear. Is the proposal from Brenda and you to reduce what constitutes a meeting from 3 to 2? Is that what we're deliberating right now?
No, what we are deliberating, Joe, is that any meeting of two or more council members where a discussion is had that would affect the people of Maine, because that's what the FOA statute says, that any of that would have to be a public meeting and have to require public notice and be available to the public.
And the bylaws today, does it say 3 or more?
The bylaws today say 3 or more.
And FOA says 2 or more.
FOA says any meeting. It doesn't give a number.
So I would have a hard time supporting that change. I think that we can't do business. The chair of the committee has to have meetings. You may have to, Paul. So I think that, and I also think, and I'm not sure I should say this out loud, but I just don't think we can honor that. I think things happened. Three of us could be talking. So I think we'd be violating that if we change that. It's just be what I think. So, and I think that we're already not that nimble and Pat, you have a hell of a hard job. Managing a large group and facilitating a large group is really challenging. So, just for what it's worth, my bigger point is I don't think we can honor that all the time if we made that change or follow that.
The if we don't make a change, I think it does open us up to le legal liability,
Mhm.
um, because someone could argue that we aren't following the FOA statute and we are supposed to do that.
So I guess maybe then we need to hear from Brendan Pat, maybe or others about how do we get this like flexibility in the bylaws if it's that clear in FOA law?
So Brendan had brought this up once before, about a year ago, and we brought it to the full council, and there was a lot of discussion. So we brought it back to governance and then never got back to it. Brendan has a change in the bylaws that he wanted to see, and he has it put in, I'll call it legalese, as to how he saw that. So it might be a time that we pull that back up again to see what that looked like. But he had some definite feelings about it and was wanted us to change it. The discussion got too long at the council meeting, and so we tabled it and then never got back to it.
So, Pat, Brendan has written a specific a specific bylaws change that he would like to see implemented.
Yeah.
So, good. That's great. That takes a lot off of me. Um, so what I think we should do here is have a discussion for a certain amount of time specifically on the implications of this and whether we can have an idea of whether we'll support it or not. We won't have to vote on it until we would do it on the next governance meeting when Brendan is available. Would anyone else like to make a comment on this? Tess and Deb and Maggie, it might be a little difficult for you all to comment on this because Pat, Joe, and I have seen uh, the Recovery Council work over the last 2 years, and I agree with Joe that it would have been very difficult to get through the grant approval process and follow the this FOA statute. Grayson.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, and you might already know this, I just wanted to mention it quickly in case anybody didn't. Um, but I couldn't tell if you were talking about having the governance committee vote on approving the bylaw change. The committee would only be able to vote to recommend it to the full council because it has to be included in the full council notice.
Yes, you're right. I probably misspoke on that, Grayson. That's what I meant.
Oh, no worries. I just wanted to for new members, if nothing else, I wanted to
Yeah,
mention that.
thank you very much.
So Paul, I just really appreciate you bringing this forward, and I think that I think we've done well the last 3 years to try to respect the guidelines, and I think what we're trying to do is protect the future. And so I think, really thinking this through and how do we put safeguards in place and what's the risk and what can we live with in terms of the risk and with potential, complaints being brought forth. But I really kind of appreciate not to put words in your mouth, but kind of like this safeguarding, because as we know what's going on around us today, things can happen. So I think we don't want the council to have all the work being done in sidebars. And I think that's been really that's been raised with the new council, and I think I've really that's been great to sort of have things managed in the room. So just raise that, just applaud you for this, and I think it's definitely worth the conversation without kind of tying our hands any more than they're tied, but also just making sure the future councils, all that they can change the bylaws, comply
Yeah.
with what's best for the citizens of Maine.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe. Maggie?
Thank you. And sorry I was late. Really rich conversation, and I get the tensions on both sides. Coming in kind of late to the conversation, I guess one thing that stood out to me is whether or not we all have a shared understanding of affects the people of Maine. I think one of the main criterias is around like decision-making points as opposed to process points. And I think a lot of conversations together are more one-on-one or around process points, whereas if the decisions are still being made publicly around whether we fund or not fund. And so I think if we also could, as part of this conversation, have a conversation and at council level around what that actually means of affecting the people of Maine, then that may also help us refine our understanding of which types of meetings actually qualify as that.
Thank you, Maggie. That's a really good point. And when I talked to Brenda specifically about that, um, she she said that what she does is she pictures a person in Maine, not part of the council, attends all the council meetings though, and listens in and and hears or sees the grants that have been applied for. And then the next meeting, they vote to approve these 10 grants. And this person doesn't know how they got from one to two. They don't, they weren't privy to the process of how we made the decision of approving certain grants and not approving others. You
That
muted me.
that makes a lot of sense. I don't
Yeah.
know how much we want to pull municipal approaches, but like we manage that at the municipal level by doing two readings. And then with appropriate supporting documents. So like the memos explain how A got to B, and then we try to do two readings, but that may not be appropriate here.
Well, Maggie, that's a very good point because municipalities have to follow the FOA statute also. So I'd be very interested in hearing how municipalities do it. Because, and in fact, there's a YouTube video that I think Brenda might have told me about, or no, Brendan gave us the link. It's about an hour long, but it's Brenda Keelty speaking to the Lewiston City Council, and I watched that whole thing, and she talks about that and talks about she answers a lot of questions that we would all have. So, no, Maggie, I'd be really interested if you could tell me. I'm not sure what you mean by the memo, but if you could explain that a little bit more, I'd be really interested in that.
And I'm like not a lawyer too, and I'm new to the municipality, so I think we take this with a grain of salt. But the practices that have been embedded kind of heavily on to me as I've transitioned into this role was really getting the supporting documentation for any public meeting robust. So, for example, if we want to tackle an issue, there's at least two meetings if there's a vote involved, unless it's an emergency and there's a procedure for emergencies. But the issue and the like proposed vote is discussed in the first meeting, and then the second meeting is when it happens, so that people have the opportunity to know what it's all about and all of that background of how that decision was made, and then provide public comment. And then after public comment, votes and decisions are made. But then it's always supported with a memo. So for example, with our opioid settlement funds, there's a, backup robust memos that capture, here's the process that's been followed to date. Here's the recommendation for the committee or wherever. for discussion. And so the public has a record both in those shared conversations that happen, as well as the backup materials, which really detail out the process. And there's a standard format that we use that goes through that. So we could try to adopt some of those practices to try to adjust and clarify, making sure people understand the why behind things, so that they can have that transparency. I think there are some backup materials that we have included, but they're not always easily accessible, and they're not always presented in the same manner. So it's sometimes hard to jump in and know exactly what that backup material represents.
It's a little hard for me to picture exactly what you're saying. It might be easier in a in-person meeting for you to kind of, I don't know, write it on a board or something. I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding what happens between meeting one and meeting two.
That's fair. Maybe what I could do is share some example links for a future conversation,
Yeah.
like types of decisions and the process that was engaged with. But like I said, I think it may not be appropriate for this, but we can take the things that might be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that would be really helpful. That'd be great. And Deb, I wouldn't mind hearing from you as a representative from the state, because Gordon had some very strong opinions about this. And I don't mean that you're an extension of Gordon, but what do you, because I'm sure you have to address this issue all the time.
Yeah, as you've been talking, I've been thinking about specifically around grants is where my mind goes. And we have such a rigid process around competitive procurement and the rules around competitive procurement. The way in which we manage some of these conversations without necessarily being entirely public is through the scoring rubric that we use. So we have a process that we follow where initially let me back up. We identify our scoring group before we even release the RFP or the RFAs. So they are already identified and it's by discipline. And we make sure that we don't have just one office. So if it's an OBH RFP or RFA, we make sure that we have licensing or main care and, just really to make sure that there's a cross representation identified in advance, again, to assure the public and others that we have not handpicked based on who responded. So that's one fail-safe. The next thing we do is we all do our own initial review with our scoring rubric and we make our own comments. And then we come together as a group for the second review, along with a mediator, I guess, or a facilitator, where we talk through our scoring and ultimately come to some form of a consensus. So certainly we get appeals when we award grants and funding and otherwise. And through the FOA process, it's really that scoring rubric and our justification for why we did the scoring that gets released so that we can have our internal conversations, certainly, but what we're sharing with our provider community is the fair and honest justification for why they scored or didn't score. And again, they can appeal all of that, and that's that competitive piece, but we try to keep it very, very tight. And having been on those scoring committees, you're really forced to put any pre-existing knowledge that you have on a back burner because it doesn't fit into that competitive procurement process. So I can talk till the cows come home about how wonderful a provider is or isn't, but it's not necessarily going to factor in because we've got to go by the rubric, and that keeps us honest and fair.
Okay, good. Just as an aside, I had an opportunity. I'm in Denver at the American Society of Addiction Medicine conference. Had an opportunity last night to go out for supper with a woman who is she was involved or the main person for, I think, 5 different grant applications with the Recovery Council. And her comment was, uh, why were more treatment programs providing increased medication for opioid use disorder not approved? Um, I kind of explained to her that we tried to even make things pretty even between recovery support, harm reduction, treatment, and what was the third? What was the fourth one? Oh, prevention. Sorry, Maggie, I'm sorry. Um, but she still had that question. I don't know how many of the meetings she attended or how, how much she's seen, but she had trouble understanding that plan. So I thought that was very telling to me. Okay, so what I would suggest with this, if no one else has any comments, I think we had a really good discussion on this, and we'll table this till the next governance committee meeting where Brendan can be here and he can give his thoughts and what his proposal for changing the bylaws would be, and we can have further discussion at it with that. But I think we can all have time to think about this, and really enjoyed listening to Maggie and Deb of how you all deal with this with your specific areas. So let's talk about, if it's okay, I want to make sure I have the agenda here right. So if we could talk about coming up with, and I don't know if we want to make it a policy or a recommendation, but regarding requests for MRC members talking to the press. So I've had a couple opportunities where a reporter asked me if they could interview me about something going on in the council. At the first one, I said no, even though I like this reporter. But the reporter did talk to another council member, and I was very impressed with her story and what she wrote and published. So the next time she asked me, I said yes. I was very careful not to say that I could not speak for the council, but I could talk about the work I did specific for the council. So this was on a specific grant proposal that I had scored, and I did discuss my scoring of that grant proposal. What are people's thoughts on this? You're going to make me talk again. Oh, no, there's Pat. Good.
So the where this came from was actually a couple council people approached Mary and I in regards to making public comment um, to the press or actually the legislature in regards to things. And so it wasn't so much of a policy, but we were thinking more or less sort of a guideline for council members. You have 15 members on that committee. And if 15 members are saying 15 different things to the press, it can get really confusing as to filter through. And it's much better when you have 15 voices at the table, particularly when we vote on an item, to have one or two voices speaking on behalf of the council. But that sort of be organized, because I'm going to say this nicely, and it is a public meeting. Sometimes the press picks and chooses what you say and often can reflect differently than what's different. And we all have passions on this committee. We all We all do. We all have opinions and we have passions. But when we speak as a council, it should be really with a voice of the council. So this was sort of a recommendation by a couple members to say, can we develop some guidelines as to when we're approached by the press or when something comes before the legislature that has something to do with the council? This particular one was on the bill that was asking municipalities to report out on their funding. And so they were seeking out members of the council to respond to that. And we just have to be careful because we're not a political group and back, we don't get on the podium and say we support or don't support a bill. We stay neutral.
So as Pat, thank you. As a council, we don't support or not support a bill. Do you think it would be appropriate for individual council members to speak to the press or legislature and state their opinion of a bill, clarifying that they're not speaking for the council?
Yeah, people are entitled, everyone, I spoke twice this year at the legislature in support of bills, but I never put anywhere on there, I'm a member of the council. It's just mine not to do. If somebody asked me if I was a member of the council, I would say, yes, I am, but I'm not here today speaking on behalf of the council.
Okay, very good. So you speak as an individual. You don't even mention that you're a member of the council. That's
Correct.
not, you don't show your CV.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Maggie.
And that makes a lot of sense. I like the way Pat framed that. I would say for the case of non-legislative items, but just council business, I think it makes sense to say council members do not speak to the press about active council business. I think it's just a bit divisive. It pits us against each other, and it adds pressure, outside pressure, to how we make decisions, which I think isn't what we want to make. I mean, I think they can comment on whether we're making decisions well or not, but engagement with the media on that should come from the executive director or their delegate. And the executive director can decide, how to communally engage us on that. But I don't think we should be, even as individuals, but as recognizing our role as members on the council, if there's any active council business, I don't think we should we should authorize each other to speak to the press about that, even if it's just our personal opinions.
Okay. That makes sense to me, and I'll have to say that I didn't follow that. And but I apologize. Does everyone kind of agree with that?
Yeah.
I think it makes a lot of sense.
I mean, your
Yep.
meetings are so public. So if you have a vote that you're voting no and 14 other members said yes, usually you state why at the public meeting. I don't think at that point it's necessary to go to the press and say, I was, the dissenting vote or whatever. The meetings are public. So anything you say or you want to say is at that meeting. So I'm not sure what the purpose of the press is. And I just think, for me, I think it should filter through the executive director, um, and go from there.
Because the
That's
executive director is the person in the know. They know, in theory, more than Mary knows more than all of us about the goings on. So I agree with Maggie.
so for right now, what I look at the guideline and what I'll do after is I'll write up a guideline that we can present to the MRC. I don't think we need to vote on it because it's not a policy. It's not part of the bylaws, but we could just present it as a guideline and a recommendation. So if you're asked to speak to the legislature, or you choose to speak to the legislature, you can speak as an individual. You do not need to mention that you're part of the Recovery Council. You can admit that if they ask, and then state you're not speaking as a council member, you're speaking as an individual. If you're asked to speak to the press about council business, you would decline that and refer them to the executive director. Does that make sense? Okay. And Joe?
Um, Another sort of example, Pat, that we dealt with that, and you were in the loop, but sometimes the legislature will ask, like they asked me and Pat to speak. So, I mean, we were in the loop, but I think, Paul, if we're drafting something, there should be process around that. Like, does that go back to Pat? Do we make mayor, like the executive director, like who, again, in the spirit of future planning, if I was a renegade, I could have just went to the HHS committee meeting, done my thing, spoke whatever. But I think that we need to put some guardrails around that too. And I think different chairs of committees and other members will be asked by particular legislators that maybe they know Pat personally and they invite her. And it seems it's pretty serious when you get invited to speak at a legislative hearing. So I think just some language around that might be helpful too, just as if an individual member gets asked, what's the process?
Yeah, it would make sense to me that if individual members are asked, that they should refer that to Pat, to whoever the chair of the council is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's only my preference as a chair. I don't know who the next chair will be, but if a certain Senate representative wanted someone, in Joe's case, they wanted Joe there. I have no problem with that. They just want, again, it just should filter so that we all know that it's happening. Again, so Joe doesn't show up and say, "Oh, by the way, Senator, Smith wanted me here." It was done the right way. I was notified that there was a request from a member of the committee that Joe be part of it. We contacted Joe. Joe happened to be out of town, so he didn't. But again, it just should filter through the chair. If the legislature has a request for a certain council member, we should certainly honor that, but just so that we know, just it should filter through the chair.
Okay, great.
And be in the framework of the council. That Pat, it would have happened, Pat and I would have been in lockstep around what I was going to be presenting and I know this sounds silly, but we're seeing it's not silly. I think we have to really put some parameters around the work.
Yeah, you do, because you want to look like a unified group. We don't want to look
Right.
like, we're in two different places. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Tess?
I just wanted to comment on the legislative piece of it. We had LD 110 regarding opioid settlement transparency from all the subdivisions. And I completely agree, as a group, we shouldn't be taking positions for or against legislation. There is a third option, testifying neither for nor against, for just providing information. As someone that works at the legislature, I'm there often. There's a lot of mystery on how opioid settlement funds are spent, the size of the pot, where they're located. So I think like this bill was very specific. It's not necessarily something super controversial, or I don't view it as controversial. So maybe there should be a process for whether it's the chair or the ED to come in with just information to help committee members make decisions. And I don't know if there will be another piece of legislation that would merit it, but I don't think it's a bad idea to have some process. I know Brendan did go to the work session on that and was able to provide some information, but I think my position would be having something just in case there are bills that are directly relevant to the work that we do.
I agree, Tess. In that bill, we certainly could have testified in the neutral, or neither for nor against, but just made a statement and been available. And then again, I think Brendan was, but I agree.
Yeah, I think that would go along with it. I think if I was asked to give information on council, how the council works or something to a legislature, I would filter that through Pat, through the council chair, whoever that may be. It's Pat.
Paul, can
Deb?
I?
Yep,
Oh, sorry.
Mary.
I also want to suggest that for any opportunity we may have to speak to the legislature. I do think having the executive director as part of that conversation is important. And I am also fresh off of a conference where I spoke to other settlement administrators about this exact topic. And I think the executive director, maybe even more so than the chair, will have a pulse on settlement funds more broadly and then specific to Maine, and also strategies that we could implement, or just recommendations for moving forward. And I think that's important because there's definitely sort of that background knowledge that I think, again, the executive director could bring, which would not necessarily be information that we've spoken about at a council meeting. That's all.
Thank you, Mary. Deb, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this comes up a lot for state offices, and we have a structure in place where we have a point person. But in the absence of a comms person, I feel like the executive director, and this is just my opinion, I feel like the executive director would be the appropriate person to almost be the spokesperson, the de facto spokesperson. And then in the event that the executive director is not available, then it might be the chair, so you have a little bit of a tiered approach. And also with the state offices, unless we have a very, very strong opinion, we oftentimes will offer letters or go with testimony of neither for nor against, as Tess was saying, with the opportunity to provide information and education. Because we do see a lot of bills come through that are so well intended, but they just don't have the necessary information or education necessary. So we use that as an opportunity. But I also think with the council being so public, having that identified spokesperson as the executive director makes a lot of sense. And then that also will shape behavior of the press as well, to know who to go to if we're always pointing them in one direction.
Thank you, Deb. I also want to mention that we did include communications as one of the key roles and responsibilities of the next ED. So that is already incorporated into what we're looking for in our next staff.
Okay, great. So what I will kind of put this together as kind of recommendations. If council members are asked to speak to the press, and then another one if they're asked to speak to legislature. For the press, what I will say is that the request should go through the executive director. If we're asked for legislation, we may filter this through the chair and the ED, may speak to the legislature. If we want to speak as an individual, then we would just not mention that we are part of the Recovery Council. If they specifically wanted information from the Recovery Council, we would filter that first through the ED and then through the chair. Am I interpreting that right? Okay, great. Any other questions or comments? We might, in the interest of government efficiency, we might actually end this meeting a little bit early.
I just want to add, Paul, that once we bring this recommendation to the full council and we have a vote, this is something that we'll put in the background documents on our website.
Okay.
And also potentially post on our homepage so that we can start to spread this information. And that way, if folks go to the Maine Recovery Council, they know exactly who to contact and what those steps look like.
So we'll give this recommendation to the council and have them vote on it so that we can publish it. Okay. So I will write it up that way. I'll write up the recommendation, and I'll put that as part of the minutes also. All right. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, I hope to see you all, what is it, next week? It's the 8th, right? At the next council meeting? All right. Well, Thank you very much. You guys
Thanks,
all have a
Paul.
great day.
Thanks,
Great rest of your
everyone.
day.
Well, thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.